Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. Oh, my wonderful friends and my new listeners, our expected guest for today, who was a newbie, kind of never understood how serious it was to kind of make your date and was unexpectedly called away. So, these things happen. So I called on one of our very favorite friends to join us at the last minute, and here he is back with us for the 11th time. Mark Gober is a Seek Reality favorite because he is spending his life very successfully doing just what we all are at least claiming that we're trying to do, which is to more deeply understand the truth about reality, about everything about reality. Mark's first book in this field is about, I think, 7 years ago. But maybe it came out, so it's 7 years old now, maybe even 8, but it's still completely up to the minute. If you haven't yet read it, then there's no better way that you can spend this coming weekend than reading this book. It's called An End to Upside Down Thinking, dispelling the myth that the brain produces consciousness and all the implications for everyday life. This is a fantastic book, frankly, but then they're all fantastic. Mark researched and wrote that book, and he has found his future because all the rest became history. Mark followed that first book with 5 more terrific books. I think it's 5, but we'll see. Each more extreme and each even better than the one before it. The next 4 were An End to Upside Down Living, reorienting our consciousness to live better and save the human species. Isn't that an amazing title? An End to Upside Down Liberty came next, turning traditional political thinking on its head to break free from enslavement. You can see he basically turned into a prophet of the future. An End to Upside Down Contact came after that. UFOs, aliens, and spirits, and why are their ongoing interactions with human civilization matters. And then came an end to the upside down reset. Boy, he was really predicting the future. The leftist vision for society under the Great Reset and how it can fool caring people into supporting harmful causes. Up to the minute. Our friend was up to the minute. Then came an end to upside down medicine and why consciousness is needed for a new paradigm of health. Mark writes beautifully. All his books also, even beyond that, are easy to read and to understand. And best of all, every book that Mark Gober writes is an amazing expose of truth. And it's truth that almost no one else dares to seek and to find, except, as you know, if you're watching the daily news, people are starting to really seek and to find that truth every day now. So we're not going to talk about the political parts, but we could just as easily talk about the political parts today. Mark, welcome. I'm so glad you're back again. This is going to be exciting. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you, Roberta. Thank you so much for the wonderful and kind introduction. And I'm glad that we're going to be speaking about consciousness today, which is where my journey began. It's where we first met and spoke, I believe in 2018 when my book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, came out. And what I'm seeing is an increase in interest in this subject matter. And I'm not sure what it is. There's something going on. And there's one particular incident that I can point to that seems to be propelling us. And it's the release of a new podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, produced by Kai Dickens. And this podcast was released in 2024, but toward the end of the year and maybe early in 2025, it reached the top of the podcast charts,
Really?
higher than Joe Rogan.
About it. Talk about it. That's great.
Yes. So this features primarily telepathy, so mind-to-mind communication in autistic children. And there are other areas that it goes into, but this is something actually that I wrote about. Dr. Diane Powell, who is trained at Johns Hopkins and also was on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. So she's a highly credentialed woman. I actually interviewed her for my podcast series called Where is My Mind? And I have a whole episode on telepathy. But for whatever reason, people are very receptive to this topic now. So I'm getting requests from people all over the place saying, Mark, have you listened to the telepathy tapes? What do you think about it? And it's wonderful. Dean Radin is in it, Rupert Sheldrake in episode 6. I'm on the board of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is mentioned in episode 6 of the telepathy tapes. So now what's happening is people are saying, whoa, if there's a reality to this, we have to rethink what it means to be a human being. And of course, the skeptics are coming out because there are new articles saying, well, these studies were not properly controlled. Many of the typical skeptic arguments, but I think it's a net positive. People are asking questions, and even Joe Rogan. Maybe this is one of the reasons the podcast became so successful. Joe Rogan mentioned this on one of his podcasts. He said the telepathy tapes are out. This is really fascinating.
It's going to break through like that. That's the kind of thing that's going to happen. I mean, Ions, frankly, still doesn't get it. I mean, I follow them pretty closely, and they still don't get the bigger picture. They come close, and then they kind of, I mean, it's hard to really accept the truth. As you know, it is hard for people to swallow hard and then just say, all right, the only thing that exists is consciousness. Nothing else exists. Because you go down that road and then you start saying, well, then there must be a God. And then that you know, that with that comes Catholicism and all the other stuff. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to. God has no religion. And when you accept that fact that God, you don't have to be religious to understand that consciousness is all that exists. When you go there, then you realize it doesn't. This is a scientific fact. It's purely scientific, as you know. I mean, you're sort of the. And I hope you will be recognized as the father of this fact. Max Planck said it, right? I mean, he's the one who
Yeah.
said, hey, guys, and he did, just for those who don't sort of carry this fact in your heads, he won the 1918 Nobel Prize as the father of quantum mechanics. He's the father of this whole line of reasoning and research. But although he basically said behind it all, there's a great mind, but he didn't necessarily call the mind God.
Mhm.
It's a great mind. There's a great thinker behind the great thought, which is reality. That's the
What
way
I
it
found,
is.
Roberta, is that there are different stages of awakening. And at different stages, people are more receptive to certain information than others. And I've
Yeah,
experienced this myself. So when I first started, if someone mentioned the word God, I would have frozen and shut everything out. So what
yeah,
I needed was the baby steps, these little pieces of evidence. And so,
right.
like the telepathy tapes, I think they do a good job of showing some extraordinary cases of these telepathic young children who are autistic but have extraordinary mental capacities. But
Yeah,
then there are these peer-reviewed papers, like some of the work from IONS and elsewhere, where they're looking at statistical effects. They don't want to overstate anything, but because it has to make it through peer review. And for some
right.
people, they need that little nudge. But like you say, Roberta, it leads you in one place if you just keep going. That the
That's right.
materialist view of the world, which says that everything is just made of matter and that our consciousness comes from our material brain, that paradigm does not hold up. And then you're forced into paradigms that are inherently spiritual or even religious.
Frankly, I think religion doesn't work. You know,
Yeah,
you get to the point, if you have been very religious, as I have been, you get to the point where you realize it doesn't work. But God is not religious.
right.
God sees it doesn't work either. And many, many sophisticated people who have been religious all their lives tell me religion doesn't work. And I say, okay, welcome to freedom. You don't have to be religious in order to be very close to God. So that's good.
Yes, and
Secret.
I think we should define these terms, spiritual, religion, and so forth, because religion often refers to a very specific, even law-based framework for how reality
Law-based.
works.
Yes, that's the
And
problem.
it's law, that's the problem. But the good part, let's say, relative to materialism is that it departs from materialism, but then it ends up having its own rigidity, which is problematic. The word spiritual to me, I like it because it's more flexible. It
Of
doesn't
course.
hold on to one
Oh, of
rigid set of
course.
laws. It's open-minded. But
Yeah.
Roberta, if you had asked me about spirituality in 2016 when I was first starting on this journey, I still would have shut down. I would have said, no, that's superstition, that people just want to believe something to comfort themselves from the inevitability of death and the
And
finality of all of that.
yes,
But I didn't at the time know of the
uh,
evidence.
It was superstitious. I remember when I first interviewed you, you were kind of shell-shocked.
Hmm.
You understood you had found something gigantic, but you sort of, it was sort of like you had caught a wild horse, and you knew you had this wild horse, by the rein, but you didn't know where it was going to take you, and you were a little alarmed by it. I remember that. It was wonderful to watch, to deal with it. It was really, really great.
Yeah, the joys of going through this process publicly. That my evolution is available for public view because you're absolutely right. I was shell shocked. In some ways, I still am, and I'm probably still adjusting. But at that time in 2018, it was very fresh that I couldn't believe all of this evidence existed to challenge the materialist view, and maybe that there is a soul, if you want to call it that, and the body is like a vehicle or a vessel, and there's some higher intelligence, and maybe even reincarnation is real because of the work that we see at the University of Virginia on
Yeah,
children with past life memories. And so I was in this whirlwind. And at the time, I was still working at my firm because I didn't leave my firm until the end of 2019, early 2020. So I
right.
was in that mode of still, I was a partner there. I was helping advise clients. And I had one foot in one door, which is the more traditional world of the business area, and then this metaphysical foot in the door. And it was difficult for me to manage those two worlds. But since I left my firm, now I've just been on this path of trying to uncover truth and see where life takes me.
But it really was enjoyable to watch you grow. It has been, it still is wonderful to watch you grow. But even matter is not solid. I mean, and you cannot, it's 99.79 after that percent empty space, literally empty space. And that's a fact. So that being the case, what are the materialists actually studying?
It's a great question. And actually, since writing that first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, my latest one, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos, I talk about the work of Stephen A. Young, who's a theoretical physics PhD. And what he's been doing in his work, again, very traditionally trained, is asking questions about that tiny, tiny amount of matter that's allegedly there. Because most scientists will say it's not 100% empty space, it's almost 100% empty space.
Well, what are those particles made out of?
So that's what he and some others are arguing is saying the early studies claiming to have found physical particles might just have been interpreted that way because they have a materialist bias, that there must be like little billiard balls hitting each other. Whereas in fact, maybe it's much more energetic and there's nothing actually physical.
Actually, energy. There's nothing. Yeah. If
Yes.
if you took a teeny tiny camera and you put it inside an atom, there'd be nothing for it to photograph. It wouldn't, because those little vortices of energy would not show on the photograph.
Yes. So Dr. Young is asking those questions like these electron clouds of probability. We have superimposed a material explanation because of the materialist bias. But what
Yes,
Dr. Young does is actually brings in the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and as sort of energetic underlays of what reality is. And this all goes back to very ancient ideas in all the major cultures around the world.
it is so fascinating to watch because a, it was just around the turn of the 20th century, shortly after that, that the scientists first discovered, and I think it was because of Max Planck and his colleagues who were discovering quantum mechanics. They said, what are we going to do? I mean, because they're going to think they've discovered God. They won't discover God. There is no God, but they're going to think they did. So to protect the scientific, this long and honorable way of looking at reality, we are going to establish a scientific dogma of materialism.
Mhm.
And they did. They literally did. The scientific gatekeepers did. The peer-reviewed journals and the university departments. And you can find those words in print if you go back and look at journals from the turn of the 20th century. No, they won't say it because
Mhm.
obviously, if they say it, it would be embarrassing now to say it. But they did say it around the turn of the 20th century. We have a dogma. Anything with a dogma has become a religion. Is no longer. So they basically applied the religion of of um, um, atheism,
Mhm.
let's call it,
Yeah.
to science. That's what it became. around the turn, just after the turn of the 20th century. And it's embarrassing to even say that because who are these fools who call themselves scientists? Nonsense. That's
Yeah.
nonsense. All it is.
Uh,
It's nonsense.
Science has become its own religion. Some call it scientism, which is in a way synonymous with atheism or agnosticism, let's say,
Yes, exactly.
where,
And that's what exactly is what I'm saying.
yeah, so the findings that scientists see, they try to force fit it into a materialist view of reality rather than saying, oh, these are anomalies that don't fit within materialism. We need to look elsewhere. And I want to add this, Roberta. I was listening to a podcast last night. It was kind of a mainstream political podcast, but then they talked about the telepathy tapes and they started applying a skeptical lens, saying, well, we don't love the methodology of how this was done. Maybe the children were getting cues from the parents and it wasn't true telepathy. And if this were real, you could just do science to prove it. That was the mentality. And I want to make this clear to your audience because I didn't fully get this when I started researching. Number one, funding challenges for this type of work are immense. There's just so much less money going to studying these phenomena like telepathy and near-death experiences and children with past life memories and mind-matter interaction. There's just so much less funding relative to more materialist type things. And number
Sure.
two, the challenges that scientists face, even if they had the money to study these things, it could be the end of their career. They could have to leave academia. I've talked to many of these scientists and I'm on the board of ION, so I know a lot of them personally. But this is a sort of thing where people will openly say, I'm not going to study this unless I have tenure because I would get kicked out of academia. So those two dynamics, the taboo and the lack of funding, it makes it more difficult to get this information out there in a traditional way, not to mention that the peer-reviewed journals are often very biased and they will reject papers
Oh, yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
just because of the subject matter.
It's all a rigged system, and it's rigged against the very studies that would need to be done to, if they, and done perfectly open-mindedly in order to investigate the very things they would need to investigate in order to find the truth.
Yes. And I'll give you a quote from Mario Beauregard, who's a well-regarded neuroscientist. He studies spiritual phenomena. He said in an interview a few years ago on the Skeptico podcast that when he was working at a neurological institute in Canada, apparently the top one, he didn't name it, he said he was told by the head of the organization that as long as she was there at the head, he would never be allowed to study spiritual phenomena
Mhm.
scientifically. And this is the kind of pressure dynamic that we have all over the place, but most people don't see that with their eyes. We don't see the politics of these organizations and the bias. And therefore, people can say, well, there's not enough scientific evidence, therefore I don't believe it. Number one, that's not true. There's a lot of scientific evidence. But number two, maybe there's not as much as other areas.
Course, of course, what you're saying is perfectly true. I mean, I've been in the field of studying the afterlife since the 70s. It was true before that. I mean, that's why I had so much trouble finding any evidence until I came across the turn of the 20th century evidence that had been produced using the deep trance mediums, the
Mm,
wonderful Gladys Osborne Leonard, all that whole group of people. There's a treasure trove of books that I could find back then, 50 years ago in used bookstores. That was wonderful, wonderful evidence. You can't find it except now at all. Nobody has it. But I have shelves of it because back then you could find those books in used bookstores. But that's what convinced me. 2 years of reading that stuff, and it's all perfectly consistent across London, across Boston, across New York, across everywhere that they were
mm.
working. You cannot find an outlier. That's not possible if it's not true.
For me, one of the big tipping points was coming across the US government's work on remote viewing, which is the ability to see things with
Remote
the
viewing
mind.
also. That
That was
that
big for me because
yeah.
I came across declassified documents that describe the process that the government used and that they said it's a real phenomenon. These are direct quotes. And in my podcast series, again, it's called Where is My Mind? It's on Spotify and Apple Podcast. I interviewed many of these scientists several years ago. So Russell Targ, who was one of the leaders of the US government's
Yep.
program. These are people who have seen psychic phenomena used for uh, national security purposes and had results. And to them, it's not a question of whether or not it's real. The question is, how can we utilize it and how can we better understand it?
My friend R. Craig Hogan is excellent at remote viewing. He
Hmm.
can do it in great detail. He says it's not even hard to do. It's very easy to do.
Yeah.
Some people can. Some people who have psychic phenomena have trained themselves to do it pretty easily.
But if you ask a materialist, they would say rightly, this is impossible because within their worldview, consciousness should just be confined to the brain. It should not go beyond space and time. It should not go outside your skull, and it certainly shouldn't be the fundamental substrate of all reality. So if you presuppose materialism, you will shut out other phenomena,
Right.
transmediumship, and so forth. But if you
Whether you
say, yeah,
say
go
it's
ahead.
easy or you say it's impossible, you're right.
Yes. So what both of us have been trying to do is to chip away at the presuppositions, the assumptions of materialism, for people
Right.
to say, wait, maybe we need to open our minds to other possibilities because maybe materialism isn't right. And materialism, it's sort of this mentality of there was a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, and there were these particles interacting with each other. And after billions of years of evolution, a human being and other organisms evolved, and consciousness popped out of their brain. So consciousness came at the very end of the picture. But the problem is you could never prove anything before consciousness because you need consciousness in order to validate something or to verify it. You need to register the experience. Otherwise, you're relying on a leap of faith. Einstein admitted this. So, Roberta, what are people saying under materialism? They say, grant me this one miracle of everything that came before
What's my
consciousness,
miracle? I'll give
and
you
then I
that.
can explain everything if you grant me that miracle.
That's right. Oh, that's so true. But the reality is, the Big Bang is nonsense, explains nothing, as you know.
Yeah, these are theories that have been force fit into a worldview. So people observe things and they say, well, we think the world works this way, so let's move the observations in this direction. But also, it's based on a view of neuroscience, which I think is important to reinforce with your audience, because neuroscience is a real area of study, and it shows us that there's correlations between the way our brain works and the way our conscious experience appears to us.
Mhm.
So let's say a part of the brain that's responsible for memory is damaged. The person might have memory loss. So we see this correlation. The brain works this way, then our consciousness shifts. And what mainstream neuroscience has often done is to say, okay, well, the brain then creates consciousness because of correlation. Why is that not okay? Because if we, in the same way that Dr. Bernardo Kastrup says this, if you have a fire and lots of firefighters show up, you might erroneously conclude that firefighters caused the fire. But we know that's silly. There's another way to explain the relationship. So maybe it's that the brain is like an antenna receiver of consciousness. In the same way that if you're watching a television set and you take a hammer and smash the antenna on the television, then the show on your screen appears scratchy. But it's not because the signal was damaged. The signal's fine. The only problem is that the apparatus that was filtering the signal, that was receiving it or an interface for it, that's what was damaged. So the brain might be like this filter, a reducing valve. It's something that's related to our direct experience, but it's not producing it. That's the key distinction.
And then there are cases of people who are born with their skulls full of cerebral fluid and a little skin of brain all around the outside. And they have an IQ of 120 and they go through their whole lives. And then when they die and there's an autopsy done, basically their skull is full of fluid with a little skin of brain around the outside. Explain that. Nobody can. So we cover it up. Oh, that never happened. What makes you think that's, and yet it's in the scientific literature that that has happened and not only once.
Yeah, the technical term is hydrocephalus. The
Right.
skull's filled with fluid, and yet the person is very functional with their consciousness. So this is an anomaly. And the importance of anomalies. So anomalies are things that don't fit within a paradigm. And there's a tendency in mainstream science, or even in all realms of society, where the anomalies are swept aside. Say, I don't want to worry about it. But we need to go back to basics here. Imagine, I talk about this in my Cosmos book, actually. Imagine there's a law that says all swans are white. And we go around the world and we find 1 million white swans. But one day we find a single black swan. That
Right.
means our law is incorrect because our law said all swans are white and all means all. So
It
we need a new
does.
law.
Yes, we do need to, but the thing is, there are other things they cannot discover where life comes from,
Hmm.
and they will never discover where life comes from because actually life is a fundamental property of consciousness.
Hmm.
Simple, but impossible because of the way they have constructed their worldview, right?
Yeah. The desire to reduce everything to little billiard balls and to say that life emerges from the random interactions of those billiard balls. This is what I was referring to with upside down thinking, that they want to, the mainstream academic world wants to start with matter and say that everything emerges from that, rather than saying there's some primordial consciousness, awareness, intelligence that we're all a part of. And it's the apparently material world that emerges from that consciousness. It's a huge flip in thinking.
It is so silly that they handicap themselves this way. They make it impossible for themselves ever to solve these easy problems. And then they spend their lives as scientists trying to make it fit when it will never fit because they have handicapped themselves and made it impossible for it to fit. Why? Why? You must sometimes like bang your head against the wall. Why? Why?
Yeah, well, there's an astrophysicist in Germany named Pavel Krupa who's been looking at dark matter because this is involved in the way in consciousness too, because the mainstream scientists will say 96% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. We only understand 4% of the universe. And of course, they're not incorporating consciousness or anything into that worldview because they're stuck in the material world. But Pavel Krupa and his colleagues have actually falsified dark matter, and they're basically saying it doesn't even work. So our cosmology is wrong. And he was asked in an interview, why are then people studying dark matter? And he said, it's because that's where you can win prizes. That's where the funding is going. So there are sociological pressures that are pushing people to study things that are dead ends. And that's what's happening everywhere. So the money's being funneled in the wrong direction rather than we should have how many millions of dollars studying near death experiences, for example. But they're being pushed in these other directions because of a presupposed worldview.
I've tried to think about this. You have given me so many more questions to ask you. I have tried to understand whether there even is such a thing as dark matter or whether it is completely a nothing.
Yes.
Because I mean, it's hard to imagine that what they have stuffed in there as 96% of what exists is truly a nothing. Take it out of there. I don't understand because I'm not a mathematician. So I know that it's a mathematical aspect of what
Mhm.
they have dreamed up. Talk about that. What is it a thing or is it not even a thing?
Well, where I lean right now, and this I go into this in my book and into the upside down cosmos, is that dark matter and dark energy, like you say, probably don't exist. That they have been plugged in, where scientists say there must be this stuff that we don't understand, because if it weren't there, we would have to rethink all of reality. And this is what Pavel Krupa is basically saying at the University of Bonn in Germany, that they've tried to test with dark matter in particular the predictions that you'd see, and they don't get the predictions. So he says we have falsified dark matter with more than 5 sigma confidence, which means more than 99.99% confidence, meaning he says it's not there. So the problem is if you take out dark matter, and dark energy has problems too, you take out this 96% that they've plugged in, it means that all of the quote unquote laws of physics have to be rethought. And that would make sense to us and this and your audience because their worldview doesn't incorporate consciousness and these other things. So I think the house of cards is starting to crumble because they're hitting
I
dead ends
hope so.
everywhere and people are starting to notice.
I hope I hope it's starting to crumble because this is all so vastly illogical. And watching them try to because I devour popular science magazines. They're humor magazines,
Yeah.
really. And but I love trying to I love watching them try to get a clue. And it's really it's sort of They are humor magazines, but in a tragic way, really, because these are people's careers and lives that we're watching unfold doing nonsense.
Often what happens is that they succumb to a logical fallacy. It's called affirming the consequent. But to put it basically, is that they jump to a conclusion about what caused the observations they see. And I'll give two statements that summarizes this logical fallacy. The first one's correct. The second one runs into problems. Statement number one, if it rained last night, the grass will be wet. That's reasonable. Second statement, which has a problem. If I see that the grass is wet, I conclude that it rained last night. Why is that statement potentially problematic? The second statement could be true. It's possible that it rained, but there might be other reasons why the grass is wet, like dew or sprinklers or many, many other things. So in
Well,
these popular science articles or even political and economic everywhere, people will say, they'll say, we observed this thing, but they kind of bury the lead and they say, well, we conclude that this is the cause and we discovered this. But actually, no, they just observed something, then they jump to the cause and say, it rained last night.
that's true. But usually they strongly favor a conclusion because they are trying desperately to find something.
Hmm.
For example, they're really trying to find the source of life. There was a period, early part of this century, when it was finding the source of life was hot. They were really trying to discover where did life come from? Because
Mhm.
they were sure they could do that. I mean, that should be an easy problem to solve after all. Because it arose at some point, and we could even sort of pinpoint when the simplest little widget became alive. But you can't find that moment because it has to have had certain elements in order for that life to be able to replicate itself. And where those how they all came together, where they all came from, how a cell became complicated enough quickly enough to be able to replicate itself. They just couldn't, no, they've never been able to do it.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see them gradually, if you read enough science magazines from the early part of the 21st century, it's kind of sad, but fascinating too to watch them gradually give up.
Hmm. Often these mainstream scientists are confusing inference with fact,
Oh yeah.
especially when
Oh,
we're dealing with
always.
things, yeah, that
Yeah.
happened a long time ago. What they really should be saying is we are inferring this, even though it happened a long time ago and there's so many other possibilities, but they narrow it into this model of reality that they just say is real, or even the Big Bang, let's say.
Oh,
They're claiming
especially with the Big Bang.
They're claiming 13.8 billion years ago in some unimaginably far away land that they know what happened based on a few observations in the present moment. That is a bit of an arrogant statement.
And they can go back to like the microsecond when it happened. That's the part that fascinates me. How do you know that?
Well, they run into problems, and there's a term called it's the reification fallacy, where you invent a concept and speak about it as if it's real, which reinforces the idea that it's real, even though it's never been established. So dark matter and dark energy, reification fallacy. Another one with the Big Bang. There's an alleged particle called the inflaton that caused rapid inflation at the early periods of the Big Bang, because if they didn't have an inflaton, then the Big Bang wouldn't work properly. And no one's ever found an inflaton, by the way.
If they had called it a shrinkathon, we never would have.
Right.
I have never heard that word. Oh, but we had to have an inflaton, or we never.
Yeah. So they end up plugging things in. Another term is a post hoc rationalization. You invent things to make it all work because you presuppose that
So
something was there.
clear that the Big Bang never happened. It's such nonsense. But they made the inflaton, so clearly now we did have a
Right. Yeah. They theorize things and they say, well, oh, it must have been there because we already know that that happened,
we
this Big
made
Bang.
an
So
inflaton. Now we know it happened.
Yeah. It sounds silly, but how many departments of physics and astrophysics are looking at these things in a very serious way?
Well, we discovered the inflaton, and we luckily we named it inflaton and not shrinkaton.
Yeah,
Oh, science is so foolish, so absolutely nonsensical. I mean, if they hadn't invented science as they did, what would we have to laugh at now?
that's true.
Life is so serious, except that they made science for us to laugh at. Wasn't that good of them? Think of that. It really was so good of them.
But part of me is both curious and frustrated by all of this because I think about my academic training and how much I learned, which I now disagree with. So, why is it that we're sitting here having discussions about very basic aspects of our existence and our reality that we're having to contradict so much of what we've all been told for years? Why is reality in this world structured that way that such basic things are controversial?
But they're not even controversial because you and I understand what's real.
Yeah.
I mean, so all the people that I correspond with who listen to my blog or read my blog and listen to my podcast, and they have all learned by now. Some people ask me questions, I answer them, and they say, "Oh, that makes sense. Thanks." Now, oh, I really understand it now, and they go on with their lives.
Hmm.
None of this is complicated. It's all, as you know, it's all sensible and it all fits together and it makes sense. And nobody has to live the kinds of frustrated lives that these poor scientists live just so they can feed their children and send them to, you know, Princeton.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cycle of, unfortunately, brainwashing is the best way to put it, of a mind control where certain ideas are propagated, and then we are taught, or let's just say we, as my background, was taught to respect the experts and to find it too hard to believe that they could be wrong. And that's a big hurdle for people. They would say, Mark and Roberta, are you kidding me? You're going to tell me all these PhDs out there that they're missing something so fundamental. I don't believe that could be true because look how much training they've done and how much training have you done on these topics. That's the mentality.
I have talked with some of them. It's been years now since I've gone to a conference because I just don't want to be bothered anymore. But when I used to go to conferences, if you get a drink or two into them, they say it's all hogwash, but
Hmm.
I do have to finish my career out. But it really is all hogwash. They don't believe it. By mid-career, they don't believe it either.
Hmm.
But they play the game because they have to earn a living.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot more once if they know that you're going to keep their secret, they'll tell you the truth.
It's a sad dynamic because I was so unaware of this stuff and I thought I had a pretty good education, both academically and in the business world.
Oh, you
And
had an excellent education. Oh, my goodness.
yeah, but I was it was excellent within the mainstream paradigm. But now I have to go back, and this is what I constantly do and why I've continued to write. I'm questioning everything that I was taught. If someone tells me this is true, I want to know what are the assumptions underlying that belief. And what I find every time is that when I look at those assumptions, those basic assumptions, like is the universe fundamentally material or is it fundamentally made of consciousness? When I start looking into these basic assumptions, I see that they're very shaky in terms of what the mainstream tells us.
It's all consciousness, all of it. And when that's very freeing, actually, understanding that nothing else but consciousness exists. Oh,
And
that's freeing. It's freeing to say it and to know it to be true.
it actually conforms with our direct experience. And it can be difficult to comprehend what I just said because our perceptual organs do mental gymnastics to make us think there's a chair out there that I see that I can touch and it's all out there. But if you actually go within and experience the chair that you call out there, it's just a visual perception in your consciousness, which is right here. And if you touch it, the sensation is just something in your consciousness. So
Right.
every part of our perception is an occurrence within our consciousness right here, right now. And everything that we infer beyond that is a mentalization or mental gymnastics. Our
Yeah,
experience is only one of consciousness.
that's it. That's it. And the glorious thing is, consciousness is eternal.
Mm,
And in fact, there is no time. Time is the ultimate illusion. So if you exist now, you always have existed and you always will exist because time is an illusion.
yeah. Absolutely. We infer sequence. We infer past to present to future, but in our own experience, what is the past? It is a memory that occurs in the present moment, and then we infer that there is a past. And the future is the same thing. It's a thought in the present moment about the alleged future, and we
Right.
infer a future.
Past is no more real than future is real. We know how real that is. It could change in any way, just in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So the only thing that's real is right now. And if you exist now, you always will exist, which is how I finally get people to stop worrying about dying. When your body dies, your mind is forever.
Mm.
People get that. People accept that. And it's true. That's the glory of what I teach. There's no good news. There's no bad news because it's all good news. It's beautiful.
And what you're describing conforms with so many transformative experiences, whether it's the near-death experience, certain psychedelic states, certain states from meditation, or other awakenings. People will
Right.
describe exactly what you said:
Yes, they go
timelessness,
into non-time. That's right.
non-time, and that they're, depending on the depth of the experience, they will talk about a primordial awareness beyond space and time that they're a part of, and that there is an unconditional love that's beyond words,
That's right.
and that that is the basis of reality. And they will say, I can't actually use language to describe this. So what happens, and we see this, we've heard this a lot in various spiritual traditions where people talk about an ego death. But that's what can happen in some of these altered states too, where the sense of self goes away, and it can be terrifying because you give up the only localized sense of identity that you have, and you forget that there's a primordial consciousness beneath all of it.
But the love that replaces it, wherever you are, is so much greater. And that love becomes who you are.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. Yes. And all of this is so wonderful. And scientists give up all of that because they become obsessed with a rock, a stone, a piece of cloth. Why? So meaningless.
Yeah. Well, if we think about this, concepts like love or consciousness, they are abstractions in that we can't point to them in the way that we can point to a chair.
Yes.
And scientists like to have a reductionist view of this billiard ball hits this billiard ball, and that explains everything.
Yes.
But here we're talking about things that are way more transcendent, and mainstream science just it's like their minds blow up when they get into this other realm and say, well, yeah, maybe love is real, but it's just an epiphenomenon of the billiard balls in your brain, and then love pops out and consciousness pops out.
I don't know. I've stopped trying to even, I used to try to help them get beyond scientific thinking, but they're afraid. They're so afraid because that's how they make their living.
I've stopped as well. I mean, I've not stopped in that I love to speak about these topics and write books, but I don't like to try to convince someone who's not open-minded because
Yeah,
it actually can be harmful. They can become more defensive. And
yeah,
what I find is that people are ready on their own time frame. For me, it was around age 30 for whatever reason. And I feel like I have a lot of catching up to do. For some people, it's earlier in life, some people, it's later in life, and it's
yeah.
their own soul's timetable.
Well, bless you for what you do because what you teach is so important. And you've been so brave to go into the areas you've gone into. I mean, I guess we're all called to do different things.
Yeah.
I'm called to teach people that life is eternal. That's really what I try to do. So many people are so afraid of death. You know, death is a great day. The day you die is a great day. And I teach people a lot about what the process is so they won't be afraid of it. It doesn't hurt, it's full of joy, all of that. And who will meet them. And just the process is so easy and so much fun. And all they have to do is learn how to forgive. If you are able to forgive easily, then you can forgive yourself for all the things you think you did wrong, although you didn't do anything wrong. And then it becomes joyous. And it's just, I don't know. I just, there's nothing more that I feel I want to or need to teach them beyond that. But if they have more that they want to learn, well, there's our wonderful friend Mark, and he'll teach them all the rest of the stuff, which is really great.
Well, you reminded me of one quote I want to mention here. When I did my podcast series back in 2019, Where is My Mind? I interviewed Dr. Alan Huguenot, who had a near-death experience many decades ago. And he talked about being immersed in unconditional love and encountering a being of light that held him in its arms. And he said, upon being resuscitated, now that he's had decades to think about it, I don't mean to sound suicidal, but I can't wait to go back there.
Yes. Oh, yes. Um, my spirit guide has taken me to the astral plane several times and meet Jesus for other reasons, and I'm eager to go back. But I know I have things to do here, and I want to finish those things. I don't want to leave anything undone that I'm supposed to do. But I'm eager to go back too. I mean, once you've been there, you know that not only is there nothing to fear, it's going to be the best day of your life. So far, there's going to be better stuff to come. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing, a beautiful, beautiful thing. What do people ask you? What do people say to you when you meet with them or when you talk with them, that if you're answering questions, what kind of thing do they say to you?
It's a great question. I would say it depends on the audience, but what I found is that the audiences that seem to be drawn to my work are people who already have an interest. So they
Hmm.
might be somewhat skeptical to some degree, but they really want to have the conversation. So among those people, I've been asked this one question a few times, which is what happens to someone when they first start going down this path?
What happens
What
to them?
happens? What might you expect? And for me, it has been a complete reprioritization of life, new
Uh-huh.
interests, new relationships coming in and out. And it has been largely positive. It's been net positive, but there's also been a lot of shedding, which can be painful, of things that I might have been holding on to, old belief systems, old ways of thinking. And
Hmm.
if they're really deeply ingrained within the ego, they can be difficult to let go of.
For
So
example, what kind of old way of thinking?
let's just, okay, I'll give one easy example is that I was in a really great job. In my early 30s, I had made it to partner after about a decade at this firm. I was on a great trajectory. Everyone in my circles would say, Mark, you're in great shape. And I had written one book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, did my podcast series, Where is My Mind? And felt torn because I saw the benefits of the job I was in. And there was really interesting work I did on patented technologies and new innovations. So there was that side of me. And then the
At
side of me
a
that was interested
crossroads.
at crossroads. And so it was very difficult for me to let go of what my mind would say was a very secure career path, a good one for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
And that had to go through the internal turmoil. And then what would my colleagues say if I left after all this time? And I had to eventually make the decision to leave without knowing what my plan would be. I didn't know I was going to write more books like this. So that was
Yeah.
one example of a belief system within myself that was very painful because it
Oh,
was
yeah. I
painful.
know. I can understand how you
Yeah,
felt. Yeah. What made you make that decision?
great question. There was basically a tipping point where I foresaw what I was going to have to continue doing, and my body said, "You can't do that anymore. It's just not going to happen." It was a threshold that I exceeded the threshold of what I could tolerate in terms of having one foot in each door. And I said, I've just got to do this. And because I could feel the energetic pressure, if I had stayed, I saw how painful that would be. It wasn't even a difficult decision in some ways. It was difficult because of my mind, but I knew it was the right decision. And I hope your audience can extrapolate this to things in your own lives of where are we still caught in to an old belief system because we can rationalize why something would be a good decision when reality is that our inner knowing knows that it's not.
Yeah. I came to something similar in my own life too, because I'm also a lawyer and I was making good money and very well respected and all of that. And I had to get rid of nearly all of my clients and just concentrate on doing this. The day I came out to people that took me very seriously as their attorney and said, "Guess what? I wrote a book called The Fun of Dying, and it turns out I'm actually an afterlife expert." That was a very, very difficult day for me, but I had to do
Mm,
it. And then I wrote the other books and so on. But and actually, some of my clients thought I was more interesting after I told them about the book than before, and they became fans. But some of them gradually, pretty quickly, I'd say probably half, I, they sort of found other attorneys that didn't didn't have this interesting hobby. So, but that was good. It was time for me to do that. But
yeah.
I understand just what you mean. It's your identity that you really changed. Your identity became as a different but truer identity. It was this is who you actually are.
Yeah, these are forms of mini ego deaths, I think,
Yes.
of
Yes. Very well
excuse
put.
me, in old identification. And letting go of that is really hard because if you've identified with one thing your whole life, it can be difficult to let go of it. It feels like a terror. But like you say, while some people or things might fall away, there are new things that come in. I found this
Yeah.
every time I've taken a risk. Should I do this? And then all of a sudden something new pops up. And I've had to ask myself this with every book. Can I really publish this? Is my publisher going to like it? And if so, do I even want to put my name on this? And every time I've done it, after really having thought it through and given the proper sourcing and citations in the book, but new doors open that I didn't foresee.
Yeah, no, I think you are writing books of the future, really, and they're going to become more and more important rather than less so. No, I think they're great.
Thank you.
And we'll have you back again soon, probably to talk about some of these other books too, as they become tomorrow's news. Quite amazing. What do you want people to take away from our conversation today?
Well, there's one thing that's comes to mind. A question I've been asked recently a lot is there anything that you said before, Mark, that you disagree with now? And there are many things, if I were to go back and reread my books, where I would probably say, I kind of agree with that, but I have a different view. Or this belief now that I've looked at cosmology, I don't quite believe exactly. So I've had to publicly admit that I was wrong in certain areas. And David Hawkins, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, he talked about radical humility and
Humility, I love it.
the importance of that. And he used to say that all knowledge is provisional, meaning that I know this thing to be true based on everything that I've seen right now, but that could change. So
Right.
my process as a perfectionist, as someone who lived a career where I couldn't be wrong, where that my job was to be right all the time, is to have to publicly sometimes say, "Oh, I got this wrong a little bit," and to be okay with that, and to show people the journey that as long as you don't hold on to the beliefs too tightly when you're proposing them, it's okay. So I'm still integrating that, and I want to tell your audience that because there are probably things that all of us believe today, which in 10 years perhaps, or maybe even tomorrow, we won't fully agree with it. We might say,
Yeah.
it's sort of right, but I would tweak it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we're always learning and growing. This has been wonderful. I'm so, so glad we finally got to connect. We would have done it within a few weeks anyway, but this has been perfect today. Bless you, my dear. And you stay right there. I just want to say a few things to my friends and talk about who we're going to have for our guest next week. So everyone, this has been, I think, really so much fun. I'm so glad we got to talk to Mark again today. But once again, my beloved friends, we've come to the end of our time together. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm happy you could be with us today. And please never forget that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And when you get that, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Seek Reality's another first timer, but someone I think you're going to enjoy. Dennis J. Henson. Dennis was a successful businessman who had more or less spent his career reading and studying how success happens for people. And then he realized he'd collected a lot of great quotations. And so he put them together in a book called Real Impact, Daily Inspiration. And it's a thick book, really thick, full of inspirational reading. I thought I was just supposed to read through, but Dennis now says that his book isn't meant to be read right through. Instead, it's meant to be sipped like fine wine. And I think he's probably right about that. So please be sure to join us next week and share a little verbal wine as you go about your daily chores. And we'll sort of do it together. This week, we've been talking with the truly wonderful Mark Gober. He's been with us for the 11th time, but we're going to have him with us a few times a year because what his books are about actually is starting to come true in the world. The things he has found that were wrong actually were wrong, and now the world is beginning to discover that. So we and Mark are going to really work together through a wonderful, new, deeper reality. Mark is a brilliant intellectual seeker with an insatiable curiosity, but unlike most of us, he hasn't been able to stop himself. He's written books for the future. I just can't get over how prescient he's been about everything. So please be sure to join us next time that I say in my these little previews I give about who's going to be on next, and always join us when it's going to be Mark, and it'll be Mark several times a year from now on. He has gone back over and over again to answer core questions. He has sought reality unlike anybody else I've really ever seen, ever since 7 years ago when he came out with his first book about the obvious primacy of consciousness. I just think this man is brilliant and wonderful. I just love him to pieces, and I think you do too. Also, as you know, our great friend Craig Hogan is the president and guru of Seek Reality Online, and this is our one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality really, really is eternal. Then you'll really be prepared for the best fun you're ever going to have in your whole life. Trust me on that. I don't know whether you're aware that Steve Jobs' last words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." And actually, I just talked to the other day about with someone who said to her own father's, was it her father or her husband's last words were the same thing. I think that people are not just seeing, and when they say something huge like that, they're not just saying that they're seeing their loved ones, but they're actually seeing right into the next life. That's a major statement about the joy that's right ahead of us. We're all going to go to a wonderful, brilliant, gorgeous place, which is actually our true home. You're going to be there too. So prepare yourself. Go to seekreality.com and get a little taste of the future before you get to really drink it from a fire hose. And Craig is, I think, the best guide anyone could possibly have to what our future is going to be. And of course, teachingsbyjesus.com is your best resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher of them all, Master Jesus. We're still working on it, but we're going to try to make it really worthy of actually the best teacher there ever has been. Also, as you know by now, I have a lot of books out there, but I don't have any time to talk about them because I've had too much fun talking with our wonderful friend, Mark Gober. And there are now more than 600 past episodes of Seek Reality, and they're all available wherever audio podcasts can be found. And you can find the newer ones on Roku, Fire Stick, YouTube, and elsewhere. But meanwhile, right, quick drink. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy, please make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being, and you in particular, in all the universe, are infinitely, eternally, and perfectly loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.